Subscribe to both of my YouTube channels, Sharron WINBUSH and Goddess Sharron. Turn on notifications and share all videos globally. Thank you. The Mute R. Kelly campaign stopped the flow of R. Kelly's income. Sony releasing him hemorrhaged him financially. His inability to tour. He had back taxes because of poor management and accounting that the government seized assets for that. And then he had back child support. He's been not in a position to hire the top-notch legal team necessary to get through this entire case, which is why he was compromised in the New York case. He needs all his fans, supporters, or anyone who wants to help to send money directly to him, not through a third party, because he has an upcoming Chicago case and he must have great legal representation to defend himself to the best of his ability. Mr. Kelly is fighting a case in Chicago and he needs all of the assistance that anyone can give from all of his fans and supporters around the world. There are 3 ways that you can get money to Mr. Kelly. 1, you can send money via Western Union. That's for $300 or less. That will get to him fast. Or you can go to the BOP.gov website and send money via credit card. Those are the fastest ways to get it to him. Or you can mail a money order to him to P.O. Box 474701, Des Moines, Iowa, 50947-0001. It will go directly to Mr. Kelly, no third party, no one in between, and he will have a record of who sent what amount, and from where it was sent. So it is your way to directly help, directly impact, to directly put your hands on R. Kelly and show him that you love him, show that his fans from around the world are supporting him and they want to assist him in fighting for his freedom. This is 4 of 8 in the motion to acquit for Robert Kelly, U.S. government versus Robert Kelly, filed by Jennifer BONJEAN on February 17th, 2022. This is the section on racketeering, Act 8, Mann Act violations versus Jane, who is AZRIEL CLARY, Jane Ho 5. The government failed to prove that defendant committed Mann Act violations in connection with his sexual activity with Jane on or about April 28, 2015 and May 1, 2015 in the state of California. Jane was 17 years old in May 2015. She concedes that she misrepresented her age to defendant. That means she lied about her age when she met him and kept her true age a secret until fall 2015 after meeting defendant in Orlando, Florida. April of 2015. Jane traveled to meet him in California at the end of April 2015. The government charged defendant with 2 Mann Act violations in connection with this trip, alleging first that defendant violated 18 U.S.C. 2421A. A. Racketeering 8A, transportation. Preliminarily, the government's use of the Mann Act under the present set of facts is unprecedented and unjustified. Provides that whoever knowingly transports any individual in interstate or foreign commerce or in any territory or possession of the United States with the intent that such individual engage in prostitution or any sexual activity for which any person can be charged with a criminal offense, or attempts to do so shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 10 years or both. The government contended that defendant arranged for Jane to travel to California with the intent of willfully exposing her to a contagious, infectious, or communicable disease in violation of California Health and Safety Code. The government failed to prove a Mann Act violation under 2421A, where it offered insufficient evidence that defendant, 1, transported Jane with the intent of exposing her to herpes, and 2, committed a violation of California Health and Safety Code by proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Intent. Because there is no link connecting defendant's transportation of Jane with an intent to expose her to herpes, defendant cannot be guilty of a Mann Act violation. The Ninth and Tenth Circuit Courts of Appeal have held that to establish the intent requirement of the Mann Act violation, the government must prove that the illegal sexual activity is the dominant, significant, or motivating purpose behind the transportation. Similarly, the Third Circuit approved the district court's jury instruction that stated it is not necessary for the government to prove that the illegal sexual activity was the sole purpose of the transportation. The person may have several different purposes or motives for such travel, and each may prompt in varying degrees the act of making the journey. The government must prove beyond a reasonable doubt, however, that a significant or motivating purpose of the travel across state or foreign boundaries was to have the individual transported to engage in illegal sexual activity. In other words, the illegal sexual activity must have not been merely incidental to the trip. The Fifth Circuit analyzed the intent requirement, determining whether a dominant purpose exists. We instead ask whether the illicit behavior is one of the efficient and compelling purposes of the travel. Interpreting the dominant purpose standard to merely significant or compelling or inefficient, holding that to prove the intent element under 2423A, the illicit behavior must be one of the purposes motivating the interstate transportation. The Second Circuit does not seem to have answered the intent question, but whether this court applies a true dominant purpose standard or merely a significant or motivating purpose standard, the result is the same. The defendant's alleged violation of a California health law prohibiting him from exposing a partner to herpes was incidental to the trip. There is no proof of this record that demonstrates that the defendant's motivating purpose in transporting Jane to California was to expose her to herpes. In fact, the government cannot even show that the motivating purpose of the trip had anything to do with Jane, as Jane herself testified when asked, "And while you were 17, did you take additional trips to California with the defendant?" "Yes, I did." "And do you remember where you traveled to?" "I do not." "Do you remember what the purpose of the travel was for?" "He had shows," meaning Robert Kelly, the artist R. Kelly, was performing. That was the purpose of the travel. In short, no rational juror could find that the government proved that defendant's intent to transport Jane to California was to infect her with herpes. The violation of California Health Safety Code 120-290. Second, the government did not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that defendant committed a violation of the California Health and Safety Code 120-290 because the government charged defendant with a repealed version of the statute no longer in effect. A version that reduced the government's burden of proof. Prior to the jury charge in this case, defendant notified the court that the jury instructions did not reflect the elements of California Health and Safety Code. The government acknowledged as much, but argued that it charged defendant under the statute that was in effect in 2015. The government had no authority to charge the defendant with a statute that was repealed or inoperative at the time of prosecution. The government had no authority to charge the defendant with a statute that was repealed or inoperative at the time of prosecution. In case a statute is repealed or rendered inoperative, no further proceedings can be had to enforce it in pending prosecutions unless competent authority has kept the statute alive for that purpose. In 2015, 12290 of the California Health and Safety Code provided, except in provided in section 12291, or in the case of the removal of an afflicted person in a manner the least dangerous to the public health, any person afflicted with any contagious, infectious, or communicable disease who willfully exposes himself or herself to another person, and any person who willfully exposes another person afflicted with the disease to someone else is guilty of a misdemeanor. So even if he were guilty of this repealed and inoperative charge, it would have been a misdemeanor. The statute was overhauled entirely in 2018 after the California legislature determined that it was antiquated, having been passed during an era of discrimination toward those afflicted with HIV. The current statute bears little to no resemblance to the repealed 2015 version, least of all because it now requires a showing of a specific intent to transmit the disease. Although repealed and inoperative, the government proposed a jury instruction that attempted to reflect the elements of the 2015 statute. Apparently recognizing that the 2015 statute was unconstitutionally vague in any event, the government stepped into the shoes of the legislature and rewrote the statute to save it from a constitutional challenge. Thus, the government not only charged the defendant with a repealed statute, but rewrote it in clear violation of various constitutional provisions, including the separations of power clauses and principles of comity. Defendant's jury was instructed pursuant to a statute that never existed. A California court has no authority to rewrite a California statute, and neither does a district court sitting in New York. That's huge. Even if the government had the authority to charge defendant under the 2015 version of the California Health and Safety Code, the statute does not pass constitutional muster. Most obviously, the statute is void of vagueness, both on its face and as applied to the defendant. The doctrine of vagueness guards against arbitrary or discriminatory law enforcement by insisting that a statute provides standards to govern the actions of police officers, prosecutors, juries, and judges. Sessions versus DeMaia. As written, the 2015 law fails to provide an adequate definition that put individuals with any chronic and potentially contagious diseases on notice of what amounts of criminal conduct included communicable diseases that are not sexually transmitted. By way of example, nearly 50% of the population has herpes simplex 1, a communicable disease under the 2015 statute. Anyone with herpes simplex 1, also known as cold sores, who kisses another person without disclosing that they have herpes simplex 1 is guilty of a misdemeanor. Even if the afflicted person has no active infection outbreak and does not pass the disease along to the recipient of the kiss. Under this statute, parents with herpes simplex 1, again 50% of the population, would be prohibited from kissing their own children. One cannot imagine how many arbitrary prosecutions could take place in this current era of a pandemic if this law was in effect today. Even if the elements of the statute were as the government alleged, Insufficient evidence existed to sustain the charge. The government did not prove that defendant was contagious, infected, or had the capacity to transmit herpes during the sexual encounter he had with Jane in May of 2015. Additionally, the government cannot show that defendant acted willfully with knowledge of the consequences. Presumably, the government assumes that the consequences is transmitting the disease to the person exposed, but effective treatments exist for herpes that significantly reduce outbreaks and the likelihood of transmission if defendant was consistently taking Valtrex in April 2015. It cannot be said that he willfully exposed Jane with knowledge of the consequences, particularly since Jane was not infected with herpes in April of 2015. This racketeering act cannot be sustained where it was based on a repealed law, was rewritten, and was facially unconstitutional in any event. The Mute R. Kelly campaign stopped the flow of R. Kelly's income. Sony releasing him hemorrhaged him financially. His inability to tour. He had back taxes because of poor management and accounting that the government seized assets for that. And then he had back child support. He's been not in a position to hire the top-notch legal team necessary to get through this entire case, which is why he was compromised in the New York case. He needs all his fans, supporters, or anyone who wants to help to send money directly to him, not through a third party, because he has an upcoming Chicago case and he must have great legal representation to defend himself to the best of his ability. Mr. Kelly is fighting a case in Chicago and he needs all of the assistance that anyone can give from all of his fans and supporters around the world. There are 3 ways that you can get money to Mr. Kelly. 1, you can send money via Western Union. That's for $300 or less. That will get to him fast. Or you can go to the BOP.gov website and send money via credit card. Those are the fastest ways to get it to him. Or you can mail a money order to him to P.O. Box 474701, Des Moines, Iowa, 50947-0001. It will go directly to Mr. Kelly, no third party, no one in between, and he will have a record of who sent what amount, and from where it was sent. So it is your way to directly help, directly impact, to directly put your hands on R. Kelly and show him that you love him, show that his fans from around the world are supporting him and they want to assist him in fighting for his freedom.